Dearest observers of society's most guarded secrets, there are instruments of grace that can become vessels of justice. Tonight, I unveil a tale where patience carved its revenge in the most exquisite of forms. For 3 years, a lady's fan held more than secrets of the heart. It cradled the power to rewrite destiny itself. In the shadow of Grosvenor Square, where love turned to betrayal and betrayal to retribution, witness how a single touch can topple an empire of lies. The year was 1847, and Lady Cordelia Blackwood stood at her bedroom window overlooking the manicured gardens of Blackwood Manor. Her reflection in the diamond-paned glass revealed a woman of 24, with auburn hair swept in perfect ringlets and emerald eyes that once sparkled with innocent love. Now, those same eyes held a darkness that 3 years of calculated patience had cultivated. In her gloved hands she held the fan, a masterpiece of ivory and silver, decorated with hand-painted roses and tiny pearls. To any observer, it appeared the epitome of feminine delicacy. But Cordelia's fingers traced a nearly invisible mechanism along its edge, a secret compartment that had taken months to perfect with the help of a discreet jeweler who asked no questions. "My lady," came the voice of her lady's maid, Margaret, as she entered with the morning correspondence. "Lord Ashford's carriage approaches." Cordelia's grip tightened on the fan. Lord Ashford, the man who had whispered promises of eternal devotion beneath the moonlight, who had written sonnets comparing her eyes to the finest emeralds, who had kissed her hand and sworn that nothing could part them. The same man who had abandoned her the moment her father lost his fortune in unfortunate investments, leaving her with a diminished dowry and a wounded heart. "Very well, Margaret. Please inform Lord Ashford that I shall receive him in the blue salon." Her voice remained steady, aristocratic, betraying nothing of the storm within. As Margaret curtsied and departed, Cordelia moved to her dressing table. Among the crystal perfume bottles and silver brushes lay a small vial, no larger than her thumb, filled with a clear liquid that had cost her more than her mother's pearls. The merchant in the shadows of Whitechapel had been very specific about its properties: tasteless, odorless, and requiring only the smallest amount to prove fatal within hours. With practiced precision, she opened the fan's secret compartment and carefully applied 3 drops to a tiny reservoir hidden within the mechanism. The poison would remain stable until the precise moment she chose to release it, a moment she had rehearsed countless times in the privacy of her chambers. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. "My lady, Lord Ashford awaits." Cordelia snapped the fan closed and tucked it into her reticule. As she descended the grand staircase, her silk morning dress rustled with each step, the deep blue fabric chosen specifically to complement the very fan that would serve her justice. The marble statues lining the hallway seemed to watch her progress, their cold eyes witness to her transformation from victim to architect of retribution. Lord Ashford stood in the blue salon with his back to the door, admiring a landscape painting. When he turned, Cordelia observed the man she had once loved with desperate fervor. His dark hair was perfectly pomaded, his morning coat tailored to perfection, and his blue eyes held the same charming warmth that had once made her heart race. Now, that warmth only reminded her of how thoroughly he had deceived her. "Lady Cordelia," he said, bowing with practiced elegance. "You look radiant as always." "Lord Ashford," she replied, offering a perfectly measured curtsy. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" He cleared his throat, a gesture that once would have seemed endearing but now appeared merely nervous. "I come bearing news of great import. I wished you to hear it from me personally, given our past acquaintance." Cordelia seated herself on the damask sofa, arranging her skirts with deliberate grace. "How thoughtful of you. Please do share your news." "I am to be married," he announced, watching her face carefully for any reaction. "The engagement will be announced at the Pemberton Ball tomorrow evening." For a moment, silence filled the room like a held breath. Cordelia's training in social graces served her well. Her expression remained pleasantly neutral, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "How wonderful," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of polite interest. "And who is the fortunate lady?" Lord Ashford's smile faltered slightly. "Lady Isabella Fairfax. Your cousin." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Isabella, her sweet, naive cousin who had always looked up to Cordelia with admiring eyes. Isabella, with her golden hair and gentle disposition, who had inherited what Cordelia had lost when her great-uncle died without direct heirs. Isabella, who possessed a dowry that could restore any man's fortune and secure his place in society. "Isabella," Cordelia repeated as if tasting the name. "How perfectly suitable. Cordelia, I hope you understand. "Oh, I understand completely," she interrupted, rising gracefully from the sofa. "You require nothing more from me than understanding, do you not? How refreshing to know exactly where one stands." Lord Ashford shifted uncomfortably. "I had hoped we might remain friendly. Isabella speaks of you often, with such affection." "And I of her," Cordelia replied, moving to the window to gaze out at the garden where they had once walked together. "She is quite dear to me. I do hope she will be happy. I intend to ensure her happiness above all else." Cordelia turned back to him, her smile serene and terrible in its perfection. "I'm certain you do. And I'm certain I shall be present to witness the celebration of your engagement tomorrow evening. After all, one must support family in their moments of joy." Something in her tone made Lord Ashford pause, but he could identify nothing specific to cause alarm. "Of course. Your presence would be appreciated." "Then you shall have it," Cordelia promised, her hand unconsciously moving to her reticule where the fan waited. "I shall be there to offer my congratulations personally." As Lord Ashford took his leave, Cordelia remained at the window, watching his carriage disappear down the tree-lined drive. Tomorrow night, at the Pemberton ball, justice would finally be served. 3 years of careful planning, 3 years of nursing her wounds in silence, 3 years of perfecting her method. It would all culminate in a single decisive moment. But first, she had preparations to make. A lady attending such an important social event required the perfect ensemble, and Cordelia intended to be absolutely flawless when she executed her revenge. The camera lingers on Cordelia's reflection in the window glass, her composed features masking the storm of retribution brewing beneath the surface. In the distance, thunder rumbles, a fitting accompaniment to the tempest about to be unleashed upon London's unsuspecting aristocracy. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, as if the very heavens sensed the gravity of what was to come. Cordelia sat in her private study, a chamber that had become her sanctuary during the darkest months following Lord Ashford's betrayal. The walls were lined with leather-bound volumes of poetry and philosophy, but tucked away behind Shelley's collected works was a different sort of literature. Detailed accounts of poisons and their effects, acquired through careful correspondence with a physician in Edinburgh who believed her interest purely academic. She had spent months researching her chosen method. The substance she had procured was derived from a rare orchid found only in the jungles of Burma, brought to London by a merchant who traded in exotic botanical specimens. Its properties were remarkable, completely undetectable to taste or smell, requiring only the smallest quantity to prove effective, and providing symptoms that would perfectly mimic a sudden failure of the heart, not uncommon among gentlemen who indulged too heartily in rich foods and strong spirits. Margaret entered with the morning post, her weathered face creased with concern. The loyal maid had served the Blackwood family for 30 years and had watched Cordelia transform from a bright, trusting girl into the calculating woman who now planned her revenge with scientific precision. "My lady, might I speak freely?" Cordelia looked up from the letter she was pretending to read. "Of course, Margaret. You know you may always speak your mind with me. It's about tonight, miss. The ball. I cannot shake the feeling that you're planning something that could bring ruin upon yourself." A smile played at the corners of Cordelia's lips. Dear Margaret, so perceptive, yet so innocent of the true depths of her mistress's intentions. What could I possibly plan beyond dancing and making pleasant conversation? It is merely a ball, Margaret, not a battlefield. But even as she spoke the words, Cordelia knew that the Pemberton ballroom would indeed become a battlefield. One where the weapons were social grace and the casualties counted in reputations and lives. Margaret's expression remained troubled. Your mother, God rest her soul, always said that revenge was a luxury the wise could not afford. Perhaps it would be better to simply stay away tonight. Cordelia rose and moved to the window, where the gray morning light cast everything in shades of silver and shadow. My dear Margaret, I fear you misunderstand. I am not attending tonight for revenge. I am attending for justice. There is a difference, though I admit it may be subtle. She turned back to face her maid, and for a moment, Margaret saw not the composed lady of 24, but the broken girl who had wept in her arms 3 years ago when Lord Ashford's true nature had been revealed. Some debts must be paid, Cordelia continued softly. Some wrongs must be addressed. Tonight, I shall simply ensure that accounts are balanced. Margaret nodded reluctantly, recognizing the futility of arguing further. Very well, my lady. But please be careful. A moment's satisfaction is not worth a lifetime of regret. As Margaret departed, Cordelia returned to her preparations. She had already selected her gown for the evening, a creation of midnight blue silk that complemented her auburn hair and emerald eyes to perfection. The bodice was cut in the latest fashion, with delicate beading that caught the light like captured stars. But most importantly, the gown featured a fitted sleeve that would allow her to manipulate the fan with complete discretion. The fan itself lay open on her desk, its ivory ribs spread like the wings of some beautiful, deadly bird. She had commissioned it 2 years ago from Master Chun, a craftsman in Chinatown who specialized in creating items with hidden mechanisms. To any observer, it appeared to be nothing more than an exquisite accessory. The kind of fan that would be admired by ladies and dismissed as feminine frivolity by gentlemen. But the clever Mr. Chun had installed a mechanism so subtle that even Cordelia had required hours of practice to master its operation. A gentle pressure on the correct rib would release a nearly invisible catch, allowing a minute amount of the poison to coat the fan's surface. A simple brush against exposed skin, a hand, a wrist, even a cheek, would transfer enough of the substance to achieve the desired effect. The beauty of the method lay in its simplicity. At a crowded ball, with hundreds of guests milling about, offering congratulations and exchanging pleasantries, it would be the most natural thing in the world for a lady to accidentally brush someone with her fan while navigating the press of bodies. No one would think twice about such a minor social mishap. Cordelia had practiced the movement countless times in the privacy of her chambers, using harmless powder to test the mechanism's effectiveness. She could deploy it so smoothly, so naturally, that even someone watching closely would see nothing more than a graceful lady managing her accessories with typical feminine elegance. A knock at the study door interrupted her reverie. "Enter," she called, quickly closing the fan and slipping it into her reticule. To her surprise, it was not Margaret who entered, but Lady Isabella Fairfax herself. Cordelia's cousin stood in the doorway like a vision of springtime innocence, her golden hair gleaming in the gray morning light and her blue eyes bright with excitement. "Cordelia!" Isabella exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her cousin. "I had to come see you before tonight. I simply couldn't wait another moment to share my happiness." Cordelia allowed herself to be embraced, inhaling the scent of Isabella's rose-water perfume and feeling the genuine warmth of her cousin's affection. For a moment, just a moment, doubt flickered through her resolve like a candle flame in a draught. "Isabella," she murmured, returning the embrace with careful tenderness. "You look absolutely radiant. Marriage clearly agrees with you, even before the ceremony." Isabella pulled back, her hands still resting on Cordelia's shoulders. "Oh, Cordelia, I'm so happy I could simply burst. And I'm so relieved that you're pleased for me. I was worried that perhaps, well, given that you and Lord Ashford were once what?" Cordelia asked gently, though she knew exactly what Isabella meant. "Well, there were rumors that you two had an understanding. I would never have accepted his proposal if I thought it would cause you pain." Sweet, innocent Isabella. She had no idea that Lord Ashford had indeed proposed to Cordelia, privately, passionately, on a moonlit terrace overlooking the Thames. She had no knowledge of the promises made and broken, the letters written and burned, the future planned and destroyed. "My dear cousin," Cordelia said, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection, "I want nothing more than your happiness. If Lord Ashford can provide that, then you have my complete blessing." Isabella's face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Oh, thank you. I knew you would understand. You're so wise, Cordelia, so sophisticated. I sometimes feel like such a child compared to you." "Nonsense," Cordelia replied, guiding Isabella to the sofa where they both sat. "You have something far more precious than sophistication. You have an untainted heart. Guard it well." They spoke for another hour, Isabella chattering excitedly about wedding plans and her dreams for the future, while Cordelia listened and offered appropriate responses. All the while, her hand rested on her reticule, where the fan waited like a patient predator. When Isabella finally departed, practically dancing with joy, Cordelia remained seated in the growing shadows of her study. The afternoon was wearing on, and soon she would need to begin her preparations for the evening's events. But first, she allowed herself one final moment of doubt. Isabella's happiness had been so genuine, so pure, that it had stirred something in Cordelia's heart that she had thought buried forever. Was she truly prepared to make her cousin a widow before she had even become a wife? Then she remembered Lord Ashford's words from the previous day. "I intend to ensure her happiness above all else." The same promise he had once made to her, with equal fervor and equal sincerity. How long, she wondered, before Isabella learned the true nature of the man she was to marry? How long before her innocent joy turned to the same bitter disillusionment that had consumed Cordelia's heart? No, she was not condemning Isabella to widowhood. She was saving her from something far worse. Better a brief period of mourning than a lifetime of betrayal and disappointment. With renewed resolve, Cordelia rose and rang for Margaret. There were still hours of preparation ahead, and every detail had to be perfect. Tonight, at the Pemberton ball, Lord Ashford would finally face the consequences of his choices. And Isabella would be free to find a love worthy of her innocent heart. As the shadows lengthened across the study floor, Cordelia began her final preparations. But in the growing darkness, neither she nor anyone else noticed the figure watching from the garden below. A figure who had observed Isabella's departure and now understood far more about the evening's true agenda than anyone suspected. The Pemberton mansion blazed with the light of 1,000 candles as London's most distinguished families arrived for what would become the most talked-about ball of the 1847 season. The grand staircase was adorned with white roses and ivy, while footmen in powder-blue livery moved through the crowd bearing silver trays of champagne and delicate canapés. Cordelia arrived fashionably late, her midnight blue gown causing a stir of admiration among the assembled guests. The silk caught the candlelight with each step, and the intricate beadwork on her bodice sparkled like captured starlight. But it was her composure that truly commanded attention. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a woman completely at peace with herself and her place in the world. In her gloved hand, she carried the fan, its ivory surface gleaming innocently as she navigated the press of bodies in the grand ballroom. To the hundreds of guests milling about, it appeared to be nothing more than a beautiful accessory perfectly suited to such an elegant occasion. "Lady Cordelia," came a familiar voice from across the room. Mrs. Pemberton, their hostess, approached with the enthusiasm of a woman delighted to have secured such distinguished attendance. "How absolutely divine you look this evening. That gown is simply exquisite." "Mrs. Pemberton," Cordelia replied with a gracious curtsy, "you've outdone yourself tonight. The decorations are breathtaking." As they exchanged pleasantries, Cordelia's gaze swept the ballroom, cataloguing the guests and searching for her quarry. The room was a sea of silk and velvet, of perfectly coiffed hair and gleaming jewels. The orchestra played a gentle waltz from the minstrel's gallery, while couples glided across the polished marble floor in perfect synchronization. Near the far end of the ballroom, beneath a massive crystal chandelier, she spotted Lord Ashford. He stood in animated conversation with several other gentlemen, his evening dress immaculate and his manner confident. But what made Cordelia's breath catch was the sight of Isabella beside him, radiant in white silk with tiny pearls sewn throughout her skirts. She looked every inch the blushing bride-to-be, her hand resting trustingly on Lord Ashford's arm. "Ah," Mrs. Pemberton said, following Cordelia's gaze, "you've spotted our guests of honor. Such a lovely couple, don't you think? Lord Ashford seems absolutely devoted to dear Isabella." "Indeed," Cordelia murmured, her fingers tightening imperceptibly on the fan. "They appear quite suited to one another." From her vantage point across the room, she observed the little scene playing out around the happy couple. Other guests approached with congratulations, ladies kissed Isabella's cheeks, and gentlemen shook Lord Ashford's hand with hearty enthusiasm. It was a perfect tableau of social harmony and romantic triumph. But Cordelia noticed something else, something that perhaps only she, with her intimate knowledge of Lord Ashford's character, could detect. Even as he smiled and accepted congratulations, his eyes wandered. When a young widow in emerald green passed nearby, his gaze lingered a moment too long. When the pretty daughter of a duke laughed at something her companion said, Lord Ashford's attention shifted to her with the automatic interest of a man who had never learned to be satisfied with what he possessed. The sight confirmed everything Cordelia had suspected. Marriage to Isabella would not change Lord Ashford's fundamental nature. Within months, perhaps weeks, he would be pursuing other conquests while Isabella remained at home, gradually realizing that her husband's heart was as inconstant as the London weather. "I simply must introduce you to the Duke of Wellington's nephew," Mrs. Pemberton was saying, but Cordelia raised her fan to interrupt gently. "If I may, Mrs. Pemberton, I should like to pay my respects to the happy couple first. Isabella is, after all, my dear cousin." "Of course. How thoughtless of me. Family must come first." As Mrs. Pemberton bustled away to attend to other guests, Cordelia began her careful progress across the ballroom. She moved with deliberate slowness, stopping to exchange greetings with acquaintances and accepting compliments on her appearance. All the while, her mind calculated angles and timing, rehearsing the movements she had practiced so many times in private. The fan remained closed in her hand, its weight both familiar and portentous. She had tested the mechanism that very afternoon, using harmless chalk powder to ensure everything functioned perfectly. The poison waited in its hidden reservoir, stable and patient, requiring only the gentlest pressure to be released. "Lady Cordelia," Isabella's voice carried across the final yards between them, bright with genuine pleasure. "Oh, how wonderful that you've come." As Cordelia approached the group surrounding the engaged couple, the other guests gradually took notice of her presence. Conversations paused, heads turned, and she found herself the focus of dozens of curious eyes. Word of her arrival spread through the immediate vicinity like ripples in a pond. "Cousin Isabella," Cordelia said warmly, opening her arms for an embrace. "You look absolutely luminous tonight." As the cousins embraced, Cordelia was acutely aware of Lord Ashford standing mere feet away. When they separated, she turned to face him with a serene smile. "Lord Ashford," she said, offering a graceful curtsy. "What a pleasure to see you again so soon." He bowed in return, his expression carefully neutral. "Lady Cordelia, how kind of you to attend this evening." "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," she replied, her voice carrying just the right note of family loyalty and social grace. Such momentous occasions deserve to be witnessed by those who care most deeply for the participants. A moment of silence fell over the group, as if everyone present sensed some undercurrent of meaning in her words that they couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Pemberton chose that moment to call for attention, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Distinguished guests," she announced from the foot of the grand staircase. "If I may have your attention, Lord Ashford and Lady Isabella have graciously agreed to lead us in the next waltz, in celebration of their engagement." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd, and the orchestra in the gallery began the opening notes of a slow, romantic waltz. Cordelia stepped back with the other guests as Lord Ashford offered his arm to Isabella, leading her onto the dance floor. They made a striking couple as they began to dance, Isabella's white silk skirts swirling around her like sea foam while Lord Ashford guided her with practiced skill. Other couples gradually joined them, until the floor was filled with swirling silk and glittering jewels, all moving in perfect harmony to the lilting music. Cordelia positioned herself at the edge of the dance floor, her fan now open and moving gently to cool herself in the warm air of the crowded ballroom. To any observer, she appeared to be simply enjoying the romantic spectacle before her, perhaps feeling a touch of wistful happiness for her cousin's good fortune. But her eyes never left Lord Ashford. She watched his every movement, cataloguing his habits and anticipating his next actions. She knew from their previous acquaintance that he would seek refreshment after the dance. He always grew overheated in crowded rooms. She also knew that he would linger near the refreshment tables, accepting congratulations from guests who had not yet had the opportunity to approach him personally. That would be her moment. In the press of well-wishers offering their felicitations, a brief contact would go completely unnoticed. A gentle brush of her fan against his hand as she offered her own congratulations, and justice would finally be served. The waltz was drawing to its conclusion, the orchestra building to a crescendo that would signal the end of the dance. Cordelia snapped her fan closed and made her way toward the refreshment tables, positioning herself perfectly for the encounter to come. As the final notes died away and applause filled the ballroom, Lord Ashford and Isabella separated with a bow and curtsy. Isabella was immediately surrounded by friends eager to comment on her grace, while Lord Ashford, as Cordelia had predicted, moved toward the refreshment area. She opened her fan once more, allowing her gloved fingers to find the subtle mechanism that would release her carefully prepared surprise. The time for justice had finally arrived, but as Cordelia prepared to exact her revenge, she failed to notice a familiar figure watching from the shadows near the musicians' gallery, someone who had been observing her every movement since her arrival and who now understood exactly what was about to unfold. The refreshment alcove glowed with the warm light of silver candelabras, casting dancing shadows across tables laden with crystal glasses and delicate confections. Lord Ashford approached with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to being the center of attention, his evening dress immaculate despite the exertion of the waltz. Cordelia positioned herself near a magnificent arrangement of white roses, her fan now prepared with its deadly cargo. The mechanism had been triggered with the lightest touch of her finger, coating the ivory surface with a layer of poison so thin as to be completely invisible. To any observer, she appeared to be simply another guest seeking refreshment, and perhaps a moment's respite from the crowded ballroom. "Lord Ashford," she said as he approached the champagne service, her voice carrying the perfect note of gracious acknowledgement. "That was a beautiful waltz. Isabella dances divinely." He turned toward her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lady Cordelia." "Yes, Isabella is quite accomplished. I'm fortunate to have won such a graceful partner for life." How easily the lies flowed from his lips, Cordelia thought. She remembered when those same lips had whispered different promises to her, when that same charming smile had convinced her that she was the only woman in the world who could make him happy. "Indeed," she replied, moving a step closer under the pretense of reaching for a glass of champagne. "I'm certain you will both be very happy together." Other guests began to approach, drawn by the sight of the guest of honor. Lady Pemberton appeared with her daughter in tow, followed by several other ladies eager to offer their congratulations. The alcove began to fill with the gentle murmur of conversation and the rustle of silk skirts. This was the moment Cordelia had waited for, the perfect cover of a social gathering where a dozen people were moving about, reaching for refreshments and engaging in animated conversation. In such circumstances, a slight brush of contact would be attributed to nothing more than the natural jostling that occurred in crowded spaces. "My lord," Lady Pemberton was saying, "you simply must tell us how you proposed. Isabella has been too modest to share the details, but we're all quite desperate to hear the romantic particulars." Lord Ashford launched into what Cordelia recognized as a carefully rehearsed account of moonlight and roses, of dropping to one knee in his family's conservatory while Isabella's favorite nightingales sang in the background. It was, she had to admit, a pretty story, precisely the sort of romantic tableau that would appeal to Isabella's sentimental nature. As he spoke, gesturing with the natural animation of a practiced storyteller, Cordelia maneuvered herself to his left side. The fan was now positioned perfectly, its ivory surface gleaming innocently in the candlelight. All she needed was a moment when his attention was fully engaged elsewhere, and she could execute the subtle movement that would finally balance the scales of justice. "And then," Lord Ashford continued, his voice warm with apparent emotion, "when she said yes, I felt as though the sun had risen in my heart. I knew that I was the most fortunate man in all of England." The ladies sighed appreciatively at this romantic declaration, and even Cordelia had to admire his performance. If she had not known the truth of his character, she might have been moved by such passionate sincerity. But she did know the truth. She remembered his letters, filled with equally passionate declarations of love for her. She remembered his promises that not even death could part them, his sworn vows that her reduced circumstances meant nothing to him. And she remembered the cold, calculating look in his eyes when he had informed her father that circumstances had changed and that he could no longer honor his understanding with Lady Cordelia. The memory steeled her resolve. She moved her fan with careful precision, timing her movement to coincide with Lord Ashford's gesture as he reached for a fresh glass of champagne. The ivory surface brushed against the back of his left hand so lightly that it could have been accidental. Indeed, it appeared so natural that none of the other guests took any notice. "Oh, I do beg your pardon," Cordelia murmured graciously, as any well-bred lady would after such a minor social mishap. "Not at all," Lord Ashford replied automatically, his attention already returning to his audience. He showed no awareness that anything significant had just occurred. But Cordelia knew better. The deed was done, as simply and quietly as that. 3 years of planning, 3 years of nursing her wounded pride and broken heart, had culminated in a moment so brief and unremarkable that history would never record it. Yet within hours, Lord Ashford would begin to feel the first subtle effects of what she had administered, a gradual weakening, a sense of fatigue that would be attributed to the excitement of the evening and the consumption of rich food and wine. She moved away from the group with the casual grace of a woman who had accomplished exactly what she had intended. As she walked, she was acutely aware of the conversations flowing around her. Comments about the evening's entertainment, speculation about the coming wedding, gossip about other members of society. Normal, everyday social discourse that would continue unchanged even as the man at the center of tonight's celebration began his journey toward an elegant and untraceable demise. But as she reached the edge of the ballroom, intending to make her discreet departure, a hand touched her elbow. "Lady Cordelia?" She turned to find herself facing a gentleman she recognized, but had never been formally introduced to. Sir Marcus Thornfield, a man perhaps 10 years her senior with silver threading through his dark hair and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see far more than most people were comfortable sharing. "Sir Marcus," she said, offering a polite curtsy despite her surprise. "I fear you have me at a disadvantage. We have not been properly introduced." "We have not," he agreed, his voice carrying the cultured tones of a man who had spent considerable time abroad. "But I believe we have a mutual acquaintance who would be most interested in speaking with you this evening." Something in his manner, a subtle tension, a watchfulness that spoke of more than casual social interest, made Cordelia's pulse quicken. "Indeed? And who might that be? Perhaps we might step onto the terrace for a moment? The evening air might provide a welcome respite from the warmth of the ballroom." It was phrased as a suggestion, but Cordelia detected the undertone of an ultimatum. With growing unease, she allowed Sir Marcus to escort her through the French doors that led onto a moonlit terrace overlooking the Pembertons' formal gardens. The cool night air was indeed refreshing after the close atmosphere of the ballroom, but Cordelia found no comfort in it. Something was wrong. She could sense it in Sir Marcus's careful manner, in the way he positioned himself between her and the door, in the serious expression that had replaced his earlier social courtesy. "Now then," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the distant music drifting from the ballroom, "I believe it's time we discussed what you've just done to Lord Ashford." The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. For a moment, her composure wavered, and Sir Marcus surely saw the flash of panic in her eyes before she managed to regain control. "I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning, sir," she said with admirable steadiness. "I merely offered Lord Ashford my congratulations on his engagement. Surely there is nothing remarkable in that." "Indeed not," Sir Marcus agreed. "It's not what you said that concerns me, Lady Cordelia. It's what you applied to the surface of your fan, and subsequently transferred to Lord Ashford's hand." The night suddenly seemed darker, the distant sounds of the ball more muffled and ominous. Cordelia realized that she was trapped, not just on this terrace, but in a web of consequence that she had never anticipated. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Sir Marcus reached into his waistcoat and withdrew a small leather case, which he opened to reveal an official-looking document bearing an unmistakable seal. "Metropolitan Police," he said simply. "And you, Lady Cordelia Blackwood, are under arrest for the attempted murder of Lord Ashford." As the implications of her situation crashed over her like a cold wave, Cordelia realized that her carefully planned revenge had become something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But the most terrifying question remained. How had Sir Marcus known what she intended, and what other secrets might be about to emerge from the shadows of this glittering evening? The moonlight cast long shadows across the terrace as Cordelia stared at Sir Marcus Thornfield's credentials, her mind racing to comprehend how her carefully orchestrated plan had been discovered. The distant sound of the orchestra continued to drift from the ballroom, where guests remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding mere yards away. "You're mistaken," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her thoughts. "I have done nothing more than offer congratulations to my cousin and her fiancé. If you believe otherwise, you must provide proof of these extraordinary allegations." Sir Marcus returned the leather case to his waistcoat, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "Proof, Lady Cordelia, is something I have in abundance. Shall I begin with your visits to the exotic botanical merchant in Whitechapel? Or perhaps your correspondence with Dr. MacLeod in Edinburgh regarding the properties of various toxic substances?" Each revelation struck Cordelia like a hammer blow. The merchant who had sold her the poison had seemed so discreet, so willing to ask no questions in exchange for her substantial payment. And Dr. MacLeod had believed her inquiries to be purely academic, related to a novel she claimed to be writing. "You've been watching me," she said, the reality of her situation beginning to settle over her like a shroud. "For the past 6 months," Sir Marcus confirmed. "Ever since we received a tip that someone was making inquiries about acquiring substances that could cause untraceable death. Your activities were thorough, but not as invisible as you believed." Cordelia's mind flew to Margaret, her faithful lady's maid who had expressed such concern about the evening's activities. Could loyal Margaret have betrayed her? The thought seemed impossible, yet who else could have known enough to alert the authorities? "I can see you wondering who informed us," Sir Marcus continued, displaying the same unsettling ability to read her thoughts that had characterized their entire encounter. "It wasn't anyone in your household, if that provides any comfort. No, your betrayer was someone much closer to tonight's intended victim." The French doors behind them opened, and Cordelia turned to see a figure emerging from the ballroom. To her shock, it was Lord Ashford himself, his face grave and his usual charming demeanor replaced by something far more serious. "Lady Cordelia," he said quietly, inclining his head in a minimal acknowledgement. "I fear we have much to discuss." "You," she whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "You knew." "I have known for some time that someone sought to do me harm," Lord Ashford confirmed, moving to stand beside Sir Marcus. "The question was not whether an attempt would be made, but when and how. Your methods were ingenious, I must admit. The fan was particularly clever." Cordelia's hands trembled as the full scope of her failure became clear. "How long have you known? That you possessed both motive and opportunity?" "Since the day I announced my engagement to Isabella." "That you had acquired the means?" "For the past 3 months, thanks to Sir Marcus's investigation." Lord Ashford's expression was neither triumphant nor vindictive, merely tired, as if the entire affair had become a burden he was ready to set down. "But why allow me to proceed?" Cordelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why not simply have me arrested months ago?" It was Sir Marcus who answered. "Because we needed evidence of intent, not merely preparation. Purchasing exotic substances and researching their properties is unusual, but not criminal. Actually attempting to administer poison to another person, however, crosses the line into attempted murder." The weight of her situation pressed down on Cordelia like a physical force. She had thought herself so clever, so careful in her planning and execution. Instead, she had been walking into a trap, observed and anticipated at every step. "What will happen now?" she asked, surprised by her own calmness. Perhaps it was relief that the long burden of planning and hatred could finally be set aside. "That depends largely on Lord Ashford," Sir Marcus replied, glancing at his companion. "He is the victim of your crime, and his wishes will carry considerable weight in determining how we proceed." Cordelia turned to face the man she had loved, hated, and sought to destroy. In the moonlight, his features seemed different somehow, older, more careworn, as if the evening's events had aged him years in the space of hours. "What do you want from me?" she asked him directly. Lord Ashford was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Cordelia to the gardens beyond, where shadows played among the carefully manicured hedges and flower beds. "I want you to understand something," he said finally. "When I ended our engagement 3 years ago, it was not because I ceased to care for you. It was because I realized that I was not the man you deserved, that I would inevitably cause you pain through my own weaknesses and failings." Cordelia stared at him in shock. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Isabella will discover, in time, what you already know about my character. I am not constant in my affections. I am weak where I should be strong, selfish where I should be generous. You loved me with a pure heart, and I knew that I would break that heart as surely as the sun rises." The admission hung in the night air like a ghost between them. Cordelia felt something shifting in her chest, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "So you destroyed my heart to save it?" she asked, bitterness creeping into her voice despite her emotional exhaustion. "I destroyed your future with me to give you the chance at a better one," he corrected. "Though I admit I handled the matter badly. I was young and foolish, and I thought a clean break would cause less pain than a gradual revelation of my inadequacies." Sir Marcus cleared his throat gently, reminding them both of the legal realities they still faced. "While this conversation is illuminating, we still have the matter of attempted poisoning to address." Lord Ashford turned to the police inspector with a decisive expression. "Sir Marcus, I wish to withdraw any complaint against Lady Cordelia. What occurred tonight was a misunderstanding. Nothing more." "My lord, I'm afraid it's not quite that simple. We have evidence of a deliberate attempt to." "You have evidence of a lady accidentally brushing a gentleman's hand with her fan at a crowded social gathering," Lord Ashford interrupted firmly. "Nothing more sinister than that occurred tonight, as far as I am concerned." Cordelia watched this exchange with growing amazement. After everything she had done, after 3 years of planning his demise, Lord Ashford was protecting her from the consequences of her actions. "Why?" she asked him. "After everything I've done, why would you shield me?" He turned back to her, and in his eyes she saw something she had never expected, genuine remorse. "Because I deserve everything you intended for me and more," he said quietly. "Because I failed you in every way that mattered, and because punishing you for my failures would be the final injustice in a series of them." Sir Marcus looked between them with the expression of a man who had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by its contradictions. "Very well, Lord Ashford. If you wish to characterize tonight's events as an accident, I cannot compel you to press charges. However, Lady Cordelia, I strongly suggest you find more constructive outlets for your energies in the future." You have my word, Cordelia said, meaning it completely. The hatred that had sustained her for 3 years was draining away like water from a broken vessel, leaving her feeling empty but oddly peaceful. As Sir Marcus prepared to take his leave, Lord Ashford turned to Cordelia one final time. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you will find the happiness that I could never have given you. You deserve far better than what I offered, and certainly better than what I am offering Isabella. Then why marry her? Cordelia asked. A shadow of pain crossed his features. Because some of us are too weak to choose the harder path, even when we know it's the right one. Isabella will learn this in time, I fear, but perhaps she will be stronger than both of us and find a way to be happy despite my failings. As Lord Ashford disappeared back into the ballroom, where the celebration of his engagement continued in blissful ignorance, Cordelia remained on the terrace with the sudden, overwhelming realization that her quest for revenge had revealed truths she had never expected to uncover. But the night was far from over, and the most surprising revelation was yet to come. Cordelia stood alone on the moonlit terrace, the sounds of the ball drifting around her like echoes from another world. The fan, that instrument of 3 years' careful planning, hung loose in her gloved hand, its secret now exposed and its purpose forever changed. She should have felt defeat, perhaps even despair. Instead, she experienced something unexpected, relief. The French doors opened behind her, and she turned, expecting to see a footman or perhaps another guest seeking fresh air. Instead, a figure emerged from the shadows that seemed to coalesce from the very night itself. A woman of perhaps 50 years, elegantly dressed in deep violet silk, with silver hair arranged in a style that suggested both propriety and subtle rebellion. Lady Cordelia, the woman said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of the highest echelons of society. I believe we should speak. I fear you have me at a disadvantage, Cordelia replied, though something about the woman's bearing seemed familiar. Have we been introduced? A smile played at the corners of the stranger's lips, an expression that was both knowing and mysteriously sad. Not formally, though I have been watching your activities with considerable interest this evening. Indeed, I have been observing the social dramas of London society for many years now. The woman stepped forward into the full moonlight, and Cordelia gasped as recognition dawned. The elegant bearing, the intelligent eyes, the subtle aura of someone who saw everything and revealed nothing. She had heard whispers of such a figure in the highest circles of society. You're her, Cordelia breathed. The woman they call the Shadow of Mayfair. The one who knows everyone's secrets. Lady Eveline Winston, at your service, the woman replied with a graceful incline of her head. Though I prefer to think of myself as simply an interested observer of human nature and its many fascinating complications. Cordelia's mind raced. Lady Eveline Winston was a legend among London's aristocracy, a widow of impeccable connections who seemed to know everything that happened in the drawing rooms and ballrooms of the ton. It was said that no secret escaped her notice, that no scandal unfolded without her awareness. Yet she was also known for her discretion, never using her knowledge to cause harm, but simply knowing. Why reveal yourself to me? Cordelia asked. Lady Eveline moved to the stone balustrade that overlooked the garden, her silk skirts rustling softly in the night breeze. Because tonight's events represent the conclusion of a story I have been following for quite some time. And because you, my dear, have just learned something that few people ever discover. What might that be? That revenge, no matter how carefully planned or seemingly justified, never provides the satisfaction we imagine it will. Lady Eveline turned back to face Cordelia, her expression gentle but knowing. You spent 3 years perfecting your plan for retribution, only to discover that the object of your hatred was as much a victim of his own nature as you were of his betrayal. Cordelia looked down at the fan in her hands, its ivory surface now seeming more like a relic of foolishness than an instrument of justice. You know about the poison? I know about many things, child. I knew about your preparations, your research, your careful planning. I also knew about Sir Marcus's investigation and Lord Ashford's awareness of your intentions. You could have stopped me. I could have. But sometimes the most important lessons can only be learned through experience, not warning. Lady Eveline's voice carried a warmth that suggested genuine affection rather than judgment. Tell me, what did you feel when Lord Ashford protected you from the consequences of your actions? Cordelia considered the question carefully. Confusion, shock, and something else, something I didn't expect. Compassion, perhaps, or recognition. I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, real regret. Not for ending our engagement, but for the way he handled it. For his own weaknesses. Lady Eveline nodded approvingly. And that recognition changed something in you, didn't it? The anger that had sustained you for 3 years simply evaporated. How could you know that? Because I have seen it before, my dear. The human heart is remarkably consistent in its patterns, across all levels of society and throughout all the ages. We hurt others because we ourselves are wounded. We seek revenge because we cannot face our own pain. And sometimes, if we are very fortunate, we discover that understanding can heal what punishment never could. The two women stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the night air cool against their skin, and the distant music providing a gentle accompaniment to their thoughts. What happens now? Cordelia asked finally. Now you begin the more difficult task of rebuilding your life without the purpose that hatred provided, Lady Eveline replied. It will not be easy. Revenge, even the planning of it, provides a kind of structure to one's days. Without it, you must find new meaning, new goals, new reasons to embrace tomorrow. And Lord Ashford? What of him and Isabella? Lady Eveline's expression grew thoughtful. That, my dear, is a story still being written. Lord Ashford spoke truly when he said that Isabella will discover his nature in time. But perhaps, just perhaps, the shock of nearly losing his life tonight will inspire him to become the man he could be, rather than remaining the man he has been. Do you think people can truly change? I think people can choose to change if the motivation is strong enough and the consequences of remaining the same become unbearable. Lady Eveline turned to face the ballroom, where the celebration continued in golden splendor. Time will tell whether Lord Ashford possesses such strength of character. Cordelia followed her gaze, watching the figures moving in the candlelit warmth beyond the French doors. Somewhere in that crowd, Isabella danced in blissful ignorance of the drama that had played out around her engagement. Somewhere, Lord Ashford continued to play the role of devoted fiancé, perhaps with new understanding of what that role truly demanded. Will you expose what happened tonight? Cordelia asked. In your observations of society? Lady Eveline smiled, and there was something almost maternal in the expression. My dear child, the most important stories are often the ones that must never be told. Tonight's events will remain between those who lived them, a private reckoning that needs no public audience. Then why were you watching? Why involve yourself at all? Because sometimes we all need a witness to our moments of transformation. Someone who sees not just what we have done, but what we have learned from the doing of it. Lady Eveline reached out and gently touched Cordelia's hand. You are not the same woman who entered this ballroom tonight. That change deserves to be acknowledged, even if it cannot be celebrated. As if summoned by some invisible signal, a footman appeared at the French doors. Lady Eveline, your carriage has arrived. Thank you, Thomas. She turned back to Cordelia with a final, enigmatic smile. Remember, my dear, the greatest revenge is often a life well lived, free from the poison of old resentments. I have a feeling that your story is just beginning. With that, Lady Eveline Winston disappeared back into the ballroom with the same mysterious grace with which she had emerged, leaving Cordelia alone with her thoughts and the weight of her newfound understanding. For a long moment, Cordelia remained on the terrace, watching the play of light and shadow in the garden below. Then, with deliberate ceremony, she opened the fan one final time and carefully emptied its hidden reservoir over the stone balustrade, watching as the moonlight caught the clear liquid before it disappeared into the darkness below. When the fan was clean, she closed it with a decisive snap and tucked it into her reticule. Tomorrow she would have it properly destroyed, not out of shame for what she had planned, but as a symbol of what she was choosing to leave behind. As she prepared to return to the ballroom to make her farewells, Cordelia caught her reflection in the glass of the French doors. The woman looking back at her was indeed different from the one who had arrived that evening. The hardness around her eyes had softened, and something that might have been peace had replaced the bitter determination that had defined her for so long. She would return home tonight not as a failed assassin, but as a woman who had discovered that some victories could only be won by choosing not to fight at all. The ball continued behind her, a glittering tableau of society at its most refined and artificial. But for Cordelia Blackwood, the evening's true significance lay not in what had been celebrated, but in what had been quietly, profoundly transformed. As she opened the French doors to rejoin the world of silk and candlelight, she carried with her the beginning of a different kind of story, one where the ending had yet to be written, and where the possibilities stretched ahead like an uncharted country waiting to be explored. And in the shadows of the garden below, where the remnants of 3 years' hatred had been absorbed into the earth, new seeds of understanding had been planted. Seeds that would, in time, bloom into something far more beautiful than revenge could ever have been.